Finish up the book of Esther, and we know that as we've watched this story unfold, it took place over a 10-year period from about 483 BC to 473 BC. And we know that God works in his own time frame and in his own ways. We've seen Haman hanged. We've seen the desire of Mordecai and Esther beginning to be fulfilled as God would have it fulfilled. But perhaps the biggest problem that we have is chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a bloody chapter, and we have an edict out for the Persians to kill the Jews. Because that edict can't be rescinded, another edict goes out that says that Jews may defend themselves and may kill those that hate them. And what we wind up with is a continual killing, if you will, of the enemies of the Jews. That's not unlike a lot of the Old Testament stories, but nevertheless, it is one that forces us to sit back, especially with all of the unrest in the country today, and say, does God really condone all of this killing? Well, there's a couple of things that I think you need to notice as you go through chapter 9. The first one is that God is only allowing those that hate the Jews and that would harm the Jews to be killed. Second, the Jews are not taking any plunder. That is, they're not taking the material possessions of those they kill. So there's nothing in it for them from the standpoint of rewards for killing. And as we think about that, it means also that they're killing only those that truly hate them and that want to kill them. Self-defense, if you will. Now, that's totally unlike the riots that are going on today. I'm absolutely against prejudice and partiality, but I'm also totally against what's going on in the country today. Two wrongs never made a right. Those that are being hurt are mostly innocent. There are some agitators that probably are getting hurt because the police are taking them into custody and have to do it forcefully. But I would also point out that there's plunder involved here. Those that are breaking into the stores are not picking stores of people that have prejudice and bias. They're indiscriminately picking stores that are owned by innocent people who have worked all of their lives to establish a business, and just for the sure pleasure of destroying and taking the plunder, if you will, the possessions. And you say, well, but they're getting the attention of the world. Yeah, it's not the kind of attention that any race needs. Uh, we don't need that kind of notoriety in order to get uh, equal rights and prejudice removed. There's a lot of very good, peaceful ways of getting prejudice and equal rights reversed, getting things back where it belongs, where God said, love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and your neighbor as yourself. We need to think seriously about how do we try to erase as much discrimination as we possibly can. And it's not easy. I remember one occasion I drove into a ghetto area of Boston by accident, and my car was surrounded by blacks that looked like they could really hurt me. And I felt what blacks feel when they find the prejudice of a police officer or of a group of whites that are white supremacist, and I didn't like it. And I'm sure that that was helpful for me to understand prejudice and to understand the fear that can come into you. Unfortunately, there are people on both sides, black and white, who perpetuate this hatred and this fear and inequality. What would I do if I was a governor? Let me say, I would In fact, tell all of the protesters that they could protest in the parks, that we would let the news media know where they were protesting, that they could have speeches and give their opinion about what's going on, lay out their injustices, and do it in the daytime and allow the news media to cover that. And then I would say to the protesters that are going out at night and breaking into stores and so on, we have a curfew. Protesters, you have a wonderful opportunity to go to the parks and be heard. Looters, rioters, those that are just trying to cause problems and stir up race riots. If you come out into our streets at night past the curfew and you begin to dishonor the laws of our nation and our state, city and state, you will be arrested and you will be prosecuted, you will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. That's how I would try to stop these riots. The news media feeds on this stuff. They love the sensationalism. They love to emphasize the tremendous injustice that so many have felt. They love to emphasize the brutality of one bad cop or two or three bad cops. And yet today in our society, we see blacks killing blacks every day in the community, which is wrong, absolutely wrong. We need to bring in programs that will employ, educate, and cross-reference with the rest of society so that we all see that we are the same underneath the skin color that we have. Well, that's a long way off of the book of Esther, but I thought it was worth saying. And I think as you look at this, you have to believe that God was on his throne. He controlled who was killed and who was not killed, that he took care of the injustice that was going on against the Jews. And he did it in such a way that nobody was rewarded for their killings by taking loot. And loot was never taken, and it's emphasized all the way through chapter 9. And finally, in chapter 10, we find that Mordecai is known by all of the people as a man that brought justice to the Jews, who saved a whole nation, who lived honorably as Persian king's right-hand man. And we have a happy ending, if you will, but I got to go back to chapter 9. It troubles me a great deal that so many times it seems that the injustices and it seems like the corrective action is too often violence. And I for one, am tired of it. I'm tired of the violence from the whites upon the blacks, and I'm tired upon the violence of the blacks and the other rioters that are breaking into stores and destroying people's income, destroying their own towns and their own cities. There is a better way. I think Martin Luther King set the stage correctly, and I respect him more and more the older I get. And I think that there are programs that have to be done at the city and state level to try to elevate the education and the opportunities for our minority and residents. And I think that with the federal government, especially now with the virus, have opportunities to reopen factories, to retrain people. And they should focus on the ghetto areas, the areas where most of the discrimination is being shown, and where even blacks are hurting other blacks, and try to correct that situation. Try to have more intercourse, more conversation between black and white, more understanding of prejudice and reverse prejudice. I think it's time for us to sit down and talk, not to fight. And I think it's time for us to worship a God today. Worship in the spirit of loving our neighbor as ourselves. And that's my lengthy thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.